There's a moment in every person's life when the noise fades, the crowd disappears, and you're left standing with only one companion, yourself. For some, that moment feels terrifying. For others, it feels empty. But for those who learn to understand it, those who learn to embrace it, that moment becomes the beginning of an entirely new life. Today, I want to talk to you about why being alone isn't a weakness. It's not a punishment. It's not a phase you need to escape. Being alone is a forge, a powerful place where strength, clarity, and identity are created. And if you understand it, if you use it, if you step into it fully, you will become unstoppable. 1. Alone is where you meet the real you. Most people spend their lives surrounded by expectations, opinions, and distractions. They wake up fulfilling someone else's agenda. They go to sleep thinking about someone else's judgment. They live in a world shaped by noise, not by their own voice. But when you're alone, the noise fades. Suddenly, you're face to face with the one person who can transform your life, yourself. This is where you start discovering what you truly want, not what you were told to want. This is where you identify your real strengths, not the ones others chose to see. This is where your real dreams show up, not the dreams you borrowed from society. When you step into solitude, you step into truth. And truth, your truth, is the foundation of power. 2, alone is where discipline is built. Let me tell you something that most people don't want to hear. Strength is not built in comfort. Strength is built in moments of self-responsibility. When you're alone, there's no one to blame, no one to lean on, no one to make excuses for you. You become the only one responsible for your progress. And that is exactly why solitude builds discipline like nothing else can. When you're alone, you decide what time you wake up. You decide whether you train or skip. You decide whether you pursue your goals or procrastinate. You decide whether you grow or stay stuck. This responsibility might feel heavy at first, but if you embrace, it becomes the very force that transforms your life. Discipline doesn't come from motivation. It doesn't come from inspiration. It comes from ownership. Alone is where ownership is born. 3, alone is where you become emotionally strong. People think emotional strength comes from avoiding pain. No. Emotional strength comes from facing pain and learning that it cannot break you. Being alone teaches you to process your emotions rather than hide from them. It teaches you to sit with your fears, understand them, and ultimately overcome them. It teaches you to feel your sadness without being controlled by it. It teaches you to face uncertainty with confidence. Solitude is emotional training. When you learn to regulate your emotions without needing someone to hold your hand. When you learn to calm your own mind when anxiety hits. When you learn to stand tall even when no one is cheering, you become emotionally invincible. If you can master yourself in silence, no amount of noise can shake you. 4, alone is where vision becomes clear. In life, clarity is one of the rarest gifts. Most people never find it because they're constantly surrounded by distractions. Phones, notifications, chatter, trends, pressure. They never slow down long enough to ask, what do I truly want? Where am I actually going? What kind of life do I want to build? What version of myself am I committed to becoming? When you're alone, these questions become impossible to ignore. Solitude gives you space, mental space, emotional space, spiritual space. And in that space, vision is born. Some of the greatest decisions in life are made not in busy rooms, but in quiet moments. Moments where you finally hear your inner voice louder than the world. That voice is your compass. Without it, you drift. With it, you rise. 5, alone is where you build unshakable confidence. Confidence doesn't come from praise. It doesn't come from followers or validation or applause. True confidence comes from competence, from knowing that you can depend on yourself when you're alone and you overcome challenges, when you solve problems without help, when you push through fear on your own, when you do the work even when no one is watching. You develop a deep, unshakable belief in your own abilities. You stop needing approval. You stop fearing judgment. You stop depending on external support. You become your own backbone. And once you have that inner strength, nothing and no one can take it away from you. 6, alone is where leaders are created. You want to lead? You want to inspire? You want to rise above average? Then you need to learn how to stand strong alone. Every leader, every champion, every successful individual had moments where they walked a path no one understood, no one supported, no one validated. Moments where the world doubted them, but they continued anyway. Why? Because they had developed the inner foundation that only solitude can build. Before you can lead others, you must learn to lead yourself. Before you can influence the world, you must first master your inner world. Greatness begins alone. 7. Alone is not isolation, it's preparation. Let's be clear, being alone is not about cutting people off or rejecting connection. It's not about loneliness. It's not about running from the world. Being alone is about rebuilding, strengthening, creating, preparing. It's about elevating yourself so that when you do connect, when you do lead, love, serve, and contribute, you do it from a place of strength, not weakness. Solitude is the training ground. Life is the battlefield. 8. Stand in your solitude and rise. So if you're alone right now, if you're in a season where people have fallen away, if you feel like it's just you against the world, good. This is your moment. This is your space. This is your opportunity. This is where you sharpen your mind. This is where you upgrade your identity. This is where you reinvent your life. This is where you grow stronger than ever before. You are not alone because life abandoned you. You are alone because life is preparing you. And when you walk out of this season, when you return to the world, when you step back into the arena, you will walk with a power that can't be taught, only earned. Final message. Use your solitude, honor it, work in it, grow in it, build yourself in it, because when you learn to stand strong alone, you become someone who can never be broken. Solitude reveals your true identity in a way that nothing else in life can. When you are constantly surrounded by people, noise, expectations, and distractions, you begin to operate through layers. Layers of social conditioning, layers of responsibility, layers of learned behavior, layers of who you think you should be rather than who you actually are. But when everything around you goes quiet, when the world stops pulling on you, when you're not performing, pleasing, explaining, or adjusting yourself to fit someone else's comfort, you finally come face to face with the raw, unfiltered version of yourself. And that version is the one most people never meet because they spend their entire lives running from silence. Solitude forces you to confront the parts of yourself that get buried under routine and external influence. It strips away the masks you wear, not because you're fake, but because society trains us to play roles. Alone, the role disappears, and the person underneath steps forward. In that space, the truth becomes louder. You begin to hear what your mind has been trying to say for years. You notice what gives you peace and what disturbs your energy. You become aware of what you actually value versus what you were taught to value. You start to separate your real desires from the desires you adopted subconsciously. You begin to question beliefs you've held for years, and you start seeing which ones were never yours to begin with. When you have no audience to impress, no one to perform for, and no expectations to fulfill, you start acting from authenticity rather than habit. Your choices become intentional instead of automatic. You realize how much of your identity was shaped by the environment you were in. Family, culture, friends, work, society, and you finally understand which parts of you are real and which parts were borrowed. Solitude slows down your thoughts in a way that allows clarity to emerge. When you're constantly surrounded by stimulation, your mind stays in reactive mode. It responds to what's happening around you. It absorbs what people say, what they expect, what they criticize, what they praise. But when you step away from that environment, your mind becomes reflective instead of reactive. You stop absorbing and start analyzing. You stop responding and start observing. You start noticing patterns you overlooked before, why you behave the way you do, why certain things trigger you, why you chase certain goals, why you stay in situations that don't fulfill you. Alone, you can't hide from your mind. It will bring everything to the surface. Your fears, your weaknesses, your strengths, the dreams you abandoned, the potential you ignored, the truth you avoided. And while that can feel uncomfortable, that discomfort is the doorway to self-awareness. Solitude helps you discover what truly matters to you. Most people never take the time to ask themselves what they actually want out of life because they're too busy living a life shaped by others. But when you are alone, you begin to reconnect with your inner compass. You start noticing what energizes you and what drains you. You notice which goals feel meaningful and which ones feel empty. You identify which relationships support your growth and which ones hold you back. Without the influence of others, your priorities become clearer. Your preferences become clearer. Your purpose becomes clearer. You start designing your life based on your truth instead of society's blueprint. You begin to build an identity rooted in who you genuinely are, not who you think you're supposed to be. In solitude, your inner voice becomes louder than the voices around you. And that inner voice is the real you, the voice that gets buried under responsibilities and routines. It tells you what you truly desire. It tells you what you need to let go of. It tells you what direction feels right. It tells you what version of yourself is waiting to emerge. Most people live their lives listening to everyone but themselves, which is why they never feel fulfilled. But when you give yourself the space to listen inward, your decisions become more aligned, your actions become more meaningful, and your identity becomes more grounded. You stop second-guessing yourself because clarity replaces confusion. Solitude also reveals your hidden strengths. When you're alone, you're forced to rely on your own mind, your own choices, your own resilience. You learn quickly what you're capable of. You discover that you can solve problems without guidance. You learn to trust your instincts. You become aware of your emotional capacity, your creativity, your discipline, your adaptability. You start to see the abilities you underestimated and the potential you overlooked. When there's no one else to lean on, you tap into parts of yourself that would have remained dormant in comfort or familiarity. And once you discover these strengths, your identity shifts. You begin to see yourself differently. You no longer define yourself by your past limitations. You define yourself by your newfound capabilities. Solitude forces you to confront your fears. And in that confrontation, your identity grows stronger. Whether it's the fear of failure, rejection, abandonment, or uncertainty, being alone pushes those fears into your awareness. But instead of running from them, you learn to analyze them, understand them, and ultimately transcend them. By facing your fears without distraction, you become more emotionally mature. You stop making decisions based on fear or insecurity. You start choosing from a place of strength. You begin to build an identity that's resilient rather than reactive. Solitude also reveals the quality of your inner world. When everything around you goes quiet, you realize whether you enjoy your own company or whether you've been avoiding yourself for years. This awareness is powerful because it shows you what needs healing. You start noticing your self-talk, your emotional patterns, your internal beliefs. You become aware of the stories you tell yourself, the ones that empower you and the ones that limit you. And once those stories surface, you can rewrite them. You can reshape your internal identity. You can rebuild the relationship you have with yourself. Finally, solitude gives you the freedom to reinvent yourself. When no one is watching, you're free from judgment, free from expectations, free from old labels. You can explore new interests, new perspectives, new habits, new goals. You can try, experiment, fail, grow, evolve. You can become someone new without needing anyone's approval. In solitude, you realize your identity is not fixed, it's fluid. And because it's fluid, you have the power to change it at any time. If you want the next Keynote expanded too, just let me know. Being alone builds discipline and self-responsibility in a way that nothing else can match, because solitude removes every excuse, every crutch, every shortcut you could hide behind. When you're surrounded by people, it's easy to blame circumstances, distractions, and obligations. It's easy to say you didn't have time, you were interrupted, someone else needed you, something got in the way. But when you're alone, all those external reasons disappear. What remains is the truth. Your life moves only when you move. Your progress happens only when you create it. Your habits survive only when you enforce them. Solitude exposes the real level of discipline you actually have. It shows you what you do when no one is watching, no one is holding you accountable, and no one is pushing you forward. And that exposure becomes the foundation for real growth because you can't improve what you refuse to see. When you're alone, the structure of your day becomes entirely your responsibility. You decide when to wake up, when to work, when to rest, when to learn, when to train, when to take action. There's no one else pulling your strings. That can be uncomfortable because many people rely on external pressure to move. They need deadlines from bosses, reminders from family, encouragement from friends. But discipline doesn't come from outside forces. It comes from internal standards. Solitude forces you to set those standards yourself. It teaches you to build systems instead of leaning on people. You start realizing that discipline isn't about motivation or emotional spikes. It's about consistency regardless of how you feel. Being alone makes that lesson unavoidable. Without external pressure, you begin to see where your real weaknesses are. You notice how often you procrastinate when no one is monitoring you. You see how quickly your mind looks for comfort, distraction, entertainment, or escape. You see how easily you drift when you don't anchor yourself with intention. Solitude reveals the gaps in your self-control. But this is a gift because once you see your weaknesses clearly, you can strengthen them. You can create routines that work. You can eliminate temptations that derail you. You can build habits that shape the person you want to become. In solitude, you stop pretending you're disciplined. You become disciplined. Being alone also forces you to face the consequences of your choices. When you make a mistake, you can't hide behind someone else. When you skip your goals, there's no one to bail you out. When you fail to follow through, the results show up quickly because there's nothing masking them. This accountability can feel heavy, but it is one of the most powerful forms of growth. You start realizing that every action, every decision, every delay has a direct effect on your life. That awareness pushes you to take ownership of everything you do. And the more ownership you take, the more disciplined you become because you understand that no one is coming to fix your life for you. Solitude teaches you that responsibility is not a burden. It is a source of control. In solitude, you develop a deeper respect for your own time. When people are around you, it's easy to let time slip away because conversations, interruptions, and social dynamics constantly shift your focus. But when you're alone, time becomes more visible. You see how quickly hours pass when you're not intentional. You see how much can be accomplished when you focus, and how little happens when you don't. This awareness transforms the way you manage your day. You begin to treat your time with seriousness. You become more selective about what you invest energy into. You remove distractions because you feel their impact more sharply. Discipline grows naturally when you start valuing your own time. Solitude also teaches you how to push through resistance. When you're alone and faced with a task you don't feel like doing, there's no external motivation to rely on. There's no encouragement, no competition, no immediate support. You must create your own momentum. And the act of creating that internal momentum, forcing yourself to start even when you don't want to, is the essence of discipline. The more you practice pushing yourself in isolation, the stronger your discipline becomes. You stop waiting for the perfect mood. You stop waiting for inspiration. You stop waiting for external conditions. You learn to act because action is required, not because you feel ready. Being alone also strengthens your ability to plan and execute. Without external input, you must decide what matters most. You must define your priorities, map your steps, and track your progress. This level of self-management becomes a skill. Over time, your mind becomes sharper, your focus becomes stronger, and your actions become more coordinated. Instead of reacting to life, you begin creating life deliberately. You learn to hold yourself to standards that elevate you, rather than standards that keep you comfortable. You learn to follow through even when no one is expecting you to. This is where real self-responsibility is born. Another powerful aspect of solitude is the way it eliminates dependency. When people rely too much on others for motivation, direction, or emotional support, their discipline becomes fragile. It collapses the moment external support disappears. But when you build discipline alone, it becomes unshakable. It becomes internal. It becomes something you carry with you no matter where you go or who is around you. You stop needing reminders. You stop needing validation. You stop needing someone to push you. You become self-sustained, self-driven, and self-governed. That level of independence changes everything about the way you approach your goals. Solitude also teaches you the discipline of self-regulation. With no one else around to influence your behavior, you must regulate your emotions, your impulses, your habits, and your mindset. You become more aware of when you're slipping, when you're avoiding work, when you're giving into excuses. This awareness helps you redirect yourself before small failures become big ones. You learn to catch yourself. You learn to correct yourself. You learn to manage yourself with honesty rather than denial. This is one of the highest forms of discipline, the ability to govern your own behavior without external pressure. When you're alone for extended periods, you begin to understand what routines actually support your growth. Some routines look good on paper but fail in practice. Solitude exposes that. It forces you to refine your structure. You experiment, adjust, and refine your daily systems until they genuinely work. Over time, your entire lifestyle becomes optimized for productivity, growth, and progress. This alignment doesn't happen in chaotic environments. It happens in the quiet space where you can analyze and improve your habits without interference. Solitude also develops the discipline of patience. When you're alone, you quickly realize that results don't come immediately. There's no instant reward, no immediate praise, no quick recognition. This lack of external validation forces you to remain consistent without seeing immediate payoff. That consistency builds resilience. It builds perseverance. It builds the mental endurance required to achieve meaningful goals. You learn to commit to the process rather than chase quick wins. If you want Keynote number 3 expanded next, I can continue. Emotional strength is forged in silence because silence forces you to face the parts of yourself that noise helps you avoid. When you are surrounded by people, entertainment, conversation, and constant stimulation, your mind stays distracted. You don't have to confront. your fears, your insecurities, your emotional wounds, or the thoughts you bury deep inside. But when everything becomes quiet and you are left alone with your own mind, there is nowhere to run from those emotions. They rise to the surface, whether you want them to or not. And in that uncomfortable rise, emotional strength begins its construction. Silence becomes the classroom where your emotions teach you who you really are and how much power you actually have. You stop suppressing and start understanding. You stop avoiding and start observing. You stop reacting and start recognizing the patterns inside you. Those patterns become the blueprint for emotional growth. When you sit alone with your emotions, you begin to feel them fully without numbing, without escaping, without pretending they don't exist. That feeling may be painful at first because real emotions rarely show up in gentle ways. Old memories surface, unresolved issues show up, and uncomfortable truths become visible. But emotional strength is not built by avoiding discomfort, it's built by walking through it. Solitude gives you the space to process those emotions slowly, honestly, without judgment. You start learning the difference between feeling an emotion and being controlled by it. You realize that emotions are messages, not threats. They reveal what needs healing, what needs changing, what needs acceptance. Each time you face an emotion, instead of fleeing from it, your capacity grows. Your threshold increases. Your emotional endurance expands and you become more stable, more grounded, more unshakable. Silence teaches you self-regulation. When you are alone, you don't have anyone else to calm you, reassure you, validate you, or stabilize you. You have to learn how to soothe your own mind, how to breathe through tension, how to slow down your thoughts, how to center yourself when anxiety tries to take over. These abilities aren't learned in chaos. They are learned in quiet moments where you must rely on your inner strength. The more you practice calming your emotions without external support, the stronger you become emotionally. You gain confidence in your ability to handle whatever arises internally. You learn that you don't need someone else to save you from your thoughts. You realize you have the power to create emotional balance within yourself. Being alone also reveals the emotional habits you've developed over time. You begin to notice how quickly you overthink, how easily you get triggered, how often you react instead of respond. You see patterns you never noticed before because life was moving too fast. Solitude slows everything down enough for you to examine the way your emotions influence your behavior. You start recognizing the moments when you take things personally, when you catastrophize, when you spiral into worry, or when you shut down. This awareness is uncomfortable, but it is also transformative because you cannot change what you cannot see. Once you see your patterns clearly, you can begin to reshape them. You can challenge your beliefs. You can shift your thought processes. You can create new emotional responses that serve you instead of sabotage you. In solitude, you learn the difference between loneliness and being alone. Loneliness is the feeling of lacking connection. Being alone is simply the state of being physically by yourself. Most people confuse the two, which is why they fear solitude. But when you spend enough time in silence, you begin to understand that loneliness comes from being disconnected from yourself, not from others. Solitude reconnects you with your inner world. It allows you to rebuild the relationship you have with yourself. You start to enjoy your own presence. You start finding comfort in your thoughts. You start appreciating the calm within you. And as this inner connection grows stronger, the feeling of loneliness fades. You become emotionally independent, not in a cold or detached way, but in a grounded and self-assured way. You no longer depend on external validation to feel secure. Emotional strength also grows when you learn how to handle pain without letting it define you. Emotional pain becomes sharper in solitude because it echoes more loudly. But instead of drowning in it, solitude gives you the opportunity to examine your pain with clarity. You start differentiating between pain caused by past wounds and pain created by current beliefs. You learn which hurts need forgiveness, which ones need boundaries, which ones need patience, and which ones need closure. This examination gives you emotional wisdom. You stop carrying unnecessary burdens. You stop reliving old experiences. You stop repeating emotional cycles that drain you. With each emotional layer you process alone, you become stronger, wiser, and more emotionally free. Silence also reveals the strength you already have but never acknowledged. When you weather emotional storms by yourself and still stand, you begin to see your resilience. You notice how many times you survived situations you thought would break you. You realize how many moments of fear, sadness, confusion, or heartbreak you endured without collapsing. Solitude shows you your durability. It shows you how courageous you really are. It shows you that you can face emotional suffering and still rise. Once you internalize that truth, emotional strength becomes a permanent part of your identity. You stop fearing hard emotions because you know you can handle them. Solitude also trains you to detach from emotional impulses. When you're alone, there's no immediate outlet for frustration or anger. You can't vent to someone instantly. You can't distract yourself with noise. Silence forces you to sit with the emotion long enough for it to lose intensity. You notice how emotions change when you don't feed them with reaction. The anger softens, the sadness stabilizes, the anxiety slows, the overthinking quiets. You learn that emotions are temporary, fluid, and manageable. This understanding becomes a powerful tool. When emotions no longer overpower you, you gain the ability to respond to life with clarity rather than chaos. That is emotional mastery. Another powerful aspect of solitude is emotional honesty. When you are alone, you cannot lie to yourself as easily. You can't pretend you're fine when you're not. You can't ignore what's bothering you. You can't hide behind distractions. Solitude exposes your truth, your desires, your pain, your regrets, your hopes. And while that truth can feel heavy, it creates emotional authenticity. You stop pretending. You stop suppressing. You stop masking your feelings to appear strong. Instead, you build real strength by embracing your full emotional experience. This honesty creates emotional maturity, which becomes the foundation of inner stability. Clarity and vision grow without distractions because the mind was never designed to operate at full capacity while being bombarded with noise, obligations, and constant stimulation. When your environment is filled with voices, tasks, pressures, and digital clutter, your attention becomes fragmented. You jump from one thought to another, reacting more than reflecting. In this state, you may feel busy, but you're not actually thinking, you're surviving. True vision requires depth, focus, and space, something the modern world rarely provides. But when you step into solitude and the noise falls away, your mind finally has room to expand. Thoughts become clearer. Ideas become sharper. Desires become more visible. And the fog that surrounds your life begins to lift. Without distractions, your inner world awakens in a way that makes clarity not just possible, but inevitable. When the world is quiet, your thoughts slow down enough for you to actually hear them. Most of the time, thinking happens in fragments, small pieces lost between notifications, conversations, responsibilities, and background noise. But in solitude, your mind is no longer pushed and pulled. Instead, it begins to organize itself. You start connecting dots you didn't realize were connected. You begin to understand why you've made certain choices. You see patterns in your behavior, your decisions, your successes, and your failures. The clarity that emerges in these moments isn't forced. It's natural. The mind, when undistracted, seeks order. It seeks truth. It seeks direction. Solitude simply gives it the space to do the work it's always been capable of. Vision is born in the moments when your mind is free to imagine without interruption. In your daily life, imagination gets suppressed by responsibility. There's always something you must do, someone you must respond to, something demanding your attention. These demands pull you away from creative thought, strategic thinking, and long-term planning. But when you are alone, the pressure to react disappears. You begin to think about what you truly want, not tomorrow's tasks, not today's distractions, but the life you want to build, the goals you want to pursue, the version of yourself you want to create. Vision becomes clearer because you stop living in reaction mode and start living in design mode. You stop thinking in short bursts and begin thinking in long, uninterrupted lines. Those lines form a picture, and that picture becomes direction. Silence is the perfect environment for honest self-assessment. When no one is around, there is no pressure to appear capable, successful, or confident. You can evaluate your life without filters. You begin to see which goals matter and which ones were chosen for the wrong reasons. You see where you're wasting time. You see what truly fulfills you and what drains you. This type of honesty doesn't happen in crowded environments because crowds create comparison, and comparison distorts clarity. In solitude, the only person you measure yourself against is the version of you from yesterday. That comparison creates genuine insight. You start to understand the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And the moment you understand that gap, vision expands. You can only move toward a future you can see clearly. Solitude also sharpens clarity by removing emotional interference. When you are constantly surrounded by people, your emotions get influenced by their opinions, expectations, and energy. You absorb the stress, excitement, fears, or doubts of those around you without realizing it. These emotional influences cloud your thinking, But when you step away from external emotion, your own emotions become more visible. You can see what you feel, not what others feel. You can assess your emotional state without the distortion of social influence. This emotional neutrality gives your mind the stability needed for deep clarity. Emotion and vision often clash. Strong emotion can blur perspective. In solitude, emotion settles and clarity rises. Without distractions, you also notice the internal conflicts that have been pulling you in different directions. Most people struggle with clarity, not because they don't know what they want, but because they want conflicting things. They want comfort and growth, safety and adventure, approval and authenticity. These conflicts stay hidden in noisy environments because noise keeps the mind occupied. But in silence, those conflicts come into view. Solitude forces you to choose. You begin to differentiate between desires that align with your future and desires that keep you comfortable. By identifying and resolving those internal conflicts, your vision becomes more focused. You gain direction because you stop trying to walk two opposite paths at once. Another powerful aspect of distraction-free solitude is the activation of deeper thinking. Most people stay at the surface level of their thoughts because daily life demands shallow thinking, quick decisions, quick responses, quick judgments. But deeper thinking requires time, focus, and uninterrupted space. Without distraction, your mind sinks below the surface. You start analyzing long-term consequences. You start exploring bigger ideas. You start questioning assumptions you've carried for years. You start considering possibilities that once felt too far away. This deeper thinking is where breakthroughs come from. It's where purpose evolves. It's where new goals emerge. It's where true clarity is born. Solitude also makes your priorities unmistakably clear. When you step away from distractions, you begin to see what actually matters to you, not what you pretend matters. Not what others think should matter, but what genuinely feels important. You might realize you've been pouring energy into things that don't move your life forward. You might recognize that you've been neglecting areas that require attention. You might discover that your priorities have shifted, but your behavior hasn't caught up. Solitude gives you the space to realign your actions with your true priorities. Clarity comes when you stop scattering your energy and begin directing it intentionally. When distractions fall away, your intuition becomes louder. Intuition is the quiet voice inside you that knows what direction feels right, even when logic isn't fully formed yet. But intuition gets drowned out by noise. Silence amplifies it. You start getting insights that come from a deeper place than reasoning alone. You feel when something aligns with you and when it doesn't. You sense the right path even before you fully understand it. This intuitive clarity allows you to make decisions with confidence instead of confusion. The more time you spend in solitude, the stronger that inner compass becomes. Clarity also grows because solitude teaches you how to think instead of what to think. In environments filled with opinions, you absorb other people's perspectives. Automatically over time, you can't distinguish your own beliefs from the ones you've inherited. But when you're alone, your mind begins forming its own conclusions. You start asking your own questions. You evaluate life from your own perspective. This independent thinking shapes a vision that reflects your truth instead of the world's noise. A vision created in solitude has power because it is rooted in authenticity. When you finally learn to rely on yourself, something powerful shifts inside you. Confidence stops being something you chase and starts becoming something you generate. And it doesn't come from people praising you, validating you, or telling you you're enough. It comes from the quiet, undeniable evidence that you can stand on your own 2 feet. Being on your own forces you to build internal muscles that comfort and company often keep undeveloped. When you don't have someone to lean on, you begin to recognize that the person you've been waiting for is actually you. And that realization transforms the way you move through the world. When you face problems alone, you learn that your mind can handle more than you ever believed. You begin solving things you used to run from. You handle tasks you once thought were overwhelming. Each time you figure something out on your own, no matter how small, you collect proof that you're capable. That proof is what becomes confidence. Not inspiration, not motivation, proof. Confidence is built through experiences where you rise to the occasion without needing someone to rescue you. The moment you realize you've got through another challenge with no one holding your hand, you start trusting yourself more deeply, and that trust becomes a foundation no one can take away from you. Spending time alone makes you more decisive because you no longer outsource your choices to the opinions of others. When you're always surrounded by noise, it's easy to let people influence what you should want, who you should be, and how you should live. But solitude strips away those voices and leaves you with your own. At first, that voice might feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable because you're used to filtering it through the expectations of others. But as you sit with it longer, it strengthens, it becomes clearer. And eventually you stop second-guessing yourself because you've learned to hear your own instincts without interruption. Being alone teaches you self-reliance in a way that nothing else does. You stop expecting anyone to fix your mindset, regulate your emotions, or plan your life for you. Instead, you start stepping into your own authority. You begin taking ownership of your habits, your decisions, your reactions, and your direction. Self-reliance isn't about shutting people out. It's about no longer being dependent on someone else to feel stable, grounded, or confident. When you know you can handle your life with or without support, you carry yourself differently. There's a steadiness in your posture, a quiet certainty in your tone, and a conviction in your actions that only emerges from doing the inner work alone. Every moment you rely on yourself reinforces an identity. The identity of someone strong, someone capable, someone resourceful. The world reflects back what you project. And when you project uncertainty, people sense it. But when you project self-reliance, they sense that too. You begin walking into rooms differently because you're no longer seeking permission to be there. You're no longer chasing acceptance or validation. You're centered because you've built a relationship with yourself that's grounded and unshakable. That energy changes how others respond to you. Suddenly, you're not overlooked, you're noticed. You're not questioned, you're respected. It all begins with the inner certainty that you don't need anything external to feel whole. Being alone strengthens your decision-making under pressure. Without other people to cushion your choices, you learn to face the consequences and the rewards of your decisions head on. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to evaluate situations without emotional clutter. You learn to think strategically instead of reactively. This kind of internal leadership is rare, and it grows naturally in solitude. When there's no one to blame and no one to follow, you become accountable for your own path. And with that accountability comes confidence, because the more responsibility you take, the more power you reclaim. The confidence built through self-reliance also shows up in your resilience. Life will hit everyone. But the people who bounce back the fastest are the ones who never expected anyone else to save them in the first place. When you've already learned to stand alone, setbacks don't crush you, they activate you. You don't fall apart at the idea of being unsupported because you already know you can support yourself. You've done it before. You've survived the nights where no one checked on you, the days where you handled everything alone, and the seasons where you had no one cheering for you, and you came out stronger. That memory becomes armor. Being alone also sharpens your intuition. You stop confusing the voice of your fears with the voice of your instincts because you've spent enough time listening to yourself to know the difference. When you're constantly surrounded by people, you absorb their fears, their doubts, their judgments. But when you're alone, you can hear your own inner signals clearly. You begin recognizing what feels right, what feels wrong, and what feels forced. You learn to trust that subtle pull inside you. That intuition becomes a compass, one that points you toward opportunities, away from danger and into alignment with the person you're becoming. The confidence you build in solitude expands your courage. You stop being afraid of challenges because you know you can handle them. You stop fearing failure because you've learned that you can rebuild. You stop hesitating because you no longer need reassurance. You start taking action from a place of internal certainty, and that's when doors start opening for you. Because courage backed by self-reliance is magnetic. People can sense when you're not dependent on their approval. And oddly enough, it makes them trust you more. Being alone teaches you to validate yourself instead of waiting for others to do it. You learn to congratulate yourself privately, encourage yourself privately, and comfort yourself privately. And when you stop needing external validation, you become unstoppable. You no longer shrink to fit in. You no longer compromise your values to avoid conflict. And you no longer silence yourself to be accepted. You become someone who walks through life with an inner stability that external chaos cannot shake. The more you rely on yourself, the more your world expands. You attract better relationships because you're no longer clinging to them out of need. You pursue bigger goals because you know you can carry the weight. You take more risks because you trust your own ability to adapt. Self-reliance becomes the birthplace of confidence. Confidence becomes the birthplace of action, and action becomes the birthplace of transformation.